As the title of this video suggests, the idea of a list is that we can have many variables in a computer memory sharing the same name plus unique index to access individual values. Remember that variables can have different types in Python. In our series today, we use quite a bit of a string examples. And although we can use double quotes to define a string as a fragment of text, but the string itself can also be processed as a sequence of characters. So our first sample code file is video 8.2. And just a reminder that we're using strings as a list of characters, and this is the example of a string that I have here. And we can print the string using the list function, basically converting the string to a list. I should be ready to run this code. This is the name of the file. I hope it's correct, and we can just run it in this same directory where the file is located. And the result of this output line is that you can see that all characters are listed individually with their own set of single quotes. So in Python, of course, we can use both single and double quotes to define strings. And so this is the output of this section of the example. Now, individual elements accessed in a string using a square bracket notation. We used the square bracket index notation feature in our previous homework projects while talking about substring matches between two strings. And we did this with square bracket index while comparing individual characters. Right, so here, if I say print character index 2, of course, it's nothing new. It's going to find this character right here. It's actually the third character because indices are zero-based, right? So indices start with 0, 1, 2, and therefore index 2 gives us access actually to the third element, to the third character in our string. Okay. So next example, we say that each element in this list that we printed should have on its own turn its own type. So if we say type, what is the type of this element that we obtained from our character list, which was originally defined as a string? Okay, so here we just say what is the type, and you can see that on this line 823 we print that the type or class is str. It's still a string. So all of these individual characters derived from the string are themselves strings which contain one single character. So that's the structure of the list that you get if you start using list features that are trying to access this Python string data type. All right, so then we have also this example here, 824, the next example. So we say that actually, I need to change this. We say that we redefine character. So how about I just move this comment here? And this was just a duplication from the previous line, right? So we can redefine this char list, which originally was defined as a string. We can just entirely basically redefine it as a list. Okay, so again, this list function, which we already tried using to print this first output here, can be used to convert string to a list. So if we now, after making this change, we're saying that now character list, we should have a list. If we print again the type, you can see that it displays that this time this 824 example tells us that char list now really a list type. in Python. So this time it's really a collection of strings. It's no longer a string, it's a collection of strings that contain individual characters. Okay, so this is a lot of sort of like tech speak about little tiny pieces of code, but you should read the book chapter with lots of examples, which I hope will make it for you a lot more intuitive when you think about how all these lists are organized. Okay, so moving on to our next example, and I think it's a bit of a longer example in this section right here, 825. This is example from the current book chapter. And so we have an example of a list of country names like this. So we have country names, and it's defined as Canada, USA, and Mexico. And this is a list of strings because the country names are all in double quotes in this definition. And notice that the list itself is defined starting with variable name, right? Like we define all variables, right? Then it's followed by an equal sign, which is the assignment, and it's followed by square brackets, which enclose individual elements, which themselves are the country name strings inside double quotes, right? So I'm talking about these. Another use, right? So this is a different use of square brackets. Don't mix these with index notation. This is a definition of a list in Python. It uses this list with enclosed inside these square brackets. Okay, so how are lists useful? Well, I guess number one, because all of these three elements in this latest example right here, all of the strings in this list can be accessed by index. And because the index itself can be a variable, a list is super friendly type of objects to be manipulated inside a loop. So we will later try different types of loops. There will be a lot of examples with loops when we step through our lists of different types. So how else are Python lists useful? I guess number two that I would pick is that lists can be populated with additional elements. We say in programming that lists are dynamically appendable. They do not restrict the number of elements to the original length. So we can just simply say country names append, right? Like on this line, we say append another country to the list, Iceland, and notice that we're just basically adding new element as if this was added originally, right? So it just basically grows in size, the length of the list is automatically updated, and the new element will be appended at the tail of all existing elements. Likewise, speaking of the dynamic nature of a list, since we can modify the content after the list is created, it's possible to create a list just as empty list. Okay, so it's possible to do it just like this. And if I save this version of the program and just clear screen here, clear screen, and rerun it, you see that this time, first time I print this 825 sample, the list is shown as empty. It does, so it's okay to have an empty list. Then we add one country, and then we remove it, and we back to this. And then I used and then I tried to use the next example, and this index is now out of range. So we have an index error. List index is out of range because I sort of like remove the elements that I was originally expecting to have. So if I bring them back, right, and clear screen again and rerun this example, we should oh, I didn't save my code. Let's do it again. Okay, so now we're back to the original list, and so there is no more any index issues that I'm running into. Okay, so what else? So this is important to know that lists can be empty. And of course, again, speaking of dynamic nature of lists, so you can see that this is another example of a function that modifies. We call these functions modifiers, right? The functions that update the content. This one actually removes the country. So what is exactly actually happening here when we say remove? Just to make a few notes about this call. The remove function locates an element of the list that matches the specified string. So, right, so it just goes through the entire list and says, is there a match for the string, and deletes it from memory. So the important thing here is that the indices of elements are updated automatically, just like the length of this of the list. So this is why when I made the list empty, right? So I was adding something, removing something. Eventually, I ran into index problem because it was out of range, because the indices are updated automatically, and they're always in range 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay, so there are no gaps in index of a list. Okay, so all of this sort of like suggests that the list is very highly dynamic feature in Python, and it makes it super attractive data type in programs which deal with the data loaded from a file or from a database, or simply repeated data inputs from the user, and then storing these inputs in a list. As long as the user keeps entering more and more data, we can just simply keep populating and populating and appending and adding more data to an existing list. So this is super convenient data type to have when dealing with dynamic inputs from the user. And if you think about it, the list index, right? So you can see that we use indices all the time and think about in terms of index when trying to access individual items. Index is sort of like indirect reference to a piece of data in computer memory. Such piece of data is loaded into memory as a result of user running the program, and its unique index makes the piece of data accessible. Because index itself is sort of anonymous, is just the value, just a numeric value, right? It doesn't have any specific name at all. So for instance, if our list of countries is loaded like this, right, and USA here has index 2 and Mexico, I'm sorry, USA has index 1 and Mexico has index 2, the next time when the program is run, these indices could be different if the content of the input file has been updated, for example, by the user, or if this was entered by the user and user has entered values in different order. Okay, so most of the time we would use some sort of a loop to access the individual list items, but I'm just saying that indices ranges which range from 0 to the length of the list are highly anonymous, or providing sort of like indirect access to the data piece, which happens to be in that memory location that corresponds to a specific index. All right, so the last piece here, numbered 826, also a few words to say that in this final demo, this is something again concerning about the data types. Okay, so we're looking, let me just remove this highlight here. We're just talking about this section here. And so again, this is concerning the data types. And here I have some kind of list named address, and note how it is made mostly from strings in double quotes, right? So there's like like parts over here, which happens to be inside the double quotes, but there are also a couple of numbers, like 150B Main Street, Fall River, Massachusetts. Okay, and then if we check the data types of the elements that correspond to these items, right? And here I'm using this comment where I basically to myself I remind myself what are these indices of individual pieces in this address list. Okay, so we can see that the types are a mix of strings and integers, right? So we have this class integer as a result of printing the type of address of the element 0, which is the numeric value. Address element 1 is here like suffix of the numeric house number on the street, right? And so on. So we have int, string, string, and int, and so right here +1, apparently indicating country code for international phone calls, right? So this is index 6. Also is printing itself as an int. And of course, if we say what is address, of course, because it's being defined by the square brackets, it is a list. Okay, so just to mention here, with the mixed type of elements, Python also has a tuple data type. Okay, a different data type, which is specifically designed to hold collections, sequences of different types of values. But however, we're not going to discuss it today because it's a topic for another presentation in the future. In summary, the bottom line is that you need to read and try each and every example from the current book chapter. It's very important. You should be able to try the examples and then make sure that it runs correctly on your computer, and try some changes of your own and see how the results look like.